Thank you very much, Rohit. It's nice to have so many people here. First of all, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for your commitment to learning, and for creating the space. I wasn't able to join a lot of these sessions, unfortunately, but I've heard that you're really engaged and really curious, and you're talking, and that's one of the best things that we can have in these kind of events. Because the best learning as coaches, you will know this, comes from conversations with each other. So I did bring a presentation and I did bring a fair few slides. I do want to introduce you to some of the big questions that we can have in coaching, and how positive psychology and existential philosophy can help us to help our clients navigate these kind of big questions. So I want to give you a bit of an overview over what matters to people and a theory that I've developed along the way. I have lots of little tools. We can talk about this for days. I'll try to keep it relatively concise. Mavini and Rohit and Xavi, they're going to help me a little bit, having an eye on the chat. And hopefully we can get some conversation going at the end of this. So do chat away. I might not necessarily have an eye on it, but I was told I'll be well supported with being the voice to your questions. So with that said, let me share my screen. Can you see that all? I see. Yeah, perfect. Cool. So let me jump straight in with the first big question. Who am I? And this is not just me, but it does work as means of introduction, because there's so many facets to who we are. Am I the guy in a suit presenting at a conference? Am I the academic who writes books? Am I the former program leader of an academic of a master's program in coaching psychology? Or am I the guy on the skateboard or doing a board slide in the French Alps? Who am I without that? If I were to have an injury and I couldn't do any sports anymore? If something happened and I left my job, which I did with regards to the university in 2018, is that still part of my identity? So these questions go quite deep, and just take a little moment. If somebody would ask you, who are you? And you might have done so with your coaching clients, tell me a bit about yourself is I guess a less threatening question existentially. Sometimes I do very intently just ask people, so who are you? And some clients get very anxious around that question. And that already tells me something, Some people have a very set sense of their identity and a strong foundational sense for who they are. How would they describe that? So it's a big question. Why am I here? What is my purpose? Ever since humans existed, we have looked up to the sky and asked ourselves why we were born. Certainly not everybody, but certainly a lot of people across the ages, and still today. And I think that's underneath the surface is a question that often pops up. This could show up in small questions. Could be, what kind of career do I want to choose? Or am I going to say yes to this job or to that job? Or am I going to say yes to this partner or that partner? But underlying, often there is a question around what is my purpose? Why am I here? Why was I born? Is there something I'm supposed to do with my life? That question around, am I on the right path? And you sometimes have two clear paths in front of you. Maybe you're on a path and you're not quite sure whether this is the right one. Maybe you don't see a path, leaving that path, going on a different one. So I think in coaching very often, and again, this could be the small questions, the kind of mundane seeming coaching topics that pop up, but sometimes very outspokenly, am I on the right track here? And I really love that image on the left with because we tend to paint our own path. Sometimes it can feel like the path is already there and it's carved in stone. But maybe there's a way out of this. Maybe I can write a different path for myself. But certainly is a question that concerns us. And which one's the right one here? How do I make the right choice? Sometimes it may be an absurd choice between one or the other, but if we look a little bit closer and we educate ourselves on the possibilities and what's actually there, it can be really difficult to choose. And dilemma and is weaved into the fabric of the human condition. But it can also be a very tangible choice, as I said, between partners or on jobs or ways of conduct, or how do I respond to a client when they say something or when they say nothing. As a coach, there's hundreds of thousands of decisions that we make during a single coaching session. How can we possibly be sure or confident enough that this is the right one? Our client asks us a question. Are we going to respond to it? Are we going to allow the silence? Are we going to allow them to think? Might we have a suggestion or an intervention or something that we can bring into the space that might be of value to the client? Or is it perhaps better in that moment to just hold that space and let our client grapple with that question? And we can't know. We can rarely know whether something was truly the right choice. Sometimes when I've been teaching, I've been watching so many demos and practice coaching sessions. Sometimes the question that I remember this one time, it was a closed question and very leading. And I thought to myself as an observer, it's like, what an objectively bad question, right? But later on in the reflections, the client said that was the question that unlocked them. That was the question that brought everything else out. And so that was afterwards, objectively, the most valuable question of the session, because it wasn't perceived as leading, and it wasn't leading, and it didn't lead anywhere, and it wasn't as closed as I had initially thought. So how do we choose? A big one, how can I be happy? How can I make the most out of life, live a life of perhaps meaning? How can I be more comfortable? Happiness has so many different facets, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that later on. But it's certainly a big question that I think most of us, if not all of us, pursue in some way or another, or try to find our answers to. Certainly a lot of answers out there. How can I bear all this suffering in the world? Being alive and human in the world with other people who are human. Everybody's different to us. That alone bears a lot of suffering in it, a lot of conflict and a lot of dilemma. How can we bear this? How can we walk through the world with open eyes when there's so much suffering in the world, perhaps within us? How can we deal with that? Trying to make suffering go away is a big question. And what I mean by suffering is something quite subjective. Everybody suffers to some extent at any point in our lives. Some more, some less. Sometimes we have moments or perhaps periods of our life where we don't feel we're suffering at all. But it's certainly a part of life. And what should I do with my life? If we take that blank canvas approach to us, perhaps the canvas differs in what it's made of or how large it is or the colors we have available. But ultimately, we're going to have to choose what we do with our lives. We have a certain amount of influence on our lives. And again, depending on your philosophical stance and what you've experienced and what conclusions you came to in your life, you will have different ideas on to what extent you can insert influence. Does free will exist, for example, is one of those big questions. And their influence, how we walk through life, how we navigate life. So I think it's a very important question. And how can we get along? We see increasing divide, not just in the States over the next presidential elections, not just in the UK, what we've seen with Brexit, but in general, everybody's different. Everybody's essentially, existentially in conflict, not necessarily in conflict as in fistfights and shouting matches or war, but in conflict as in we're all different. Nobody has the exact same set of opinions on everything. It just doesn't happen. And the more similar we are, the better we seem to be getting along. But also the more similar we are, the more risky is it that it gets boring. Because if we would never be challenged on anything, on the way we think or on the things we do, we can't really improve, certainly not as quickly as otherwise we would have. Hegel talked about that we need an antithesis to our thesis in order to reach synthesis. A coach, a part of a job of a coach is to challenge our clients. to confront them with perhaps a different perspective or what they've said last time or other people's opinions. It's important to be challenged. It's not comfortable to be challenged, but it's important. So how do we get along? Not just with other people, but also with ourselves. How can we live in harmony? And how do I balance what I want with the expectations of other people? And that happens all the time. Since we grow up, our parents want something for us, and maybe we want the same thing to some extent, but chances are at some point in our lives, we will want our own stuff. And that's really, really important, that especially kids develop their own sense of what they want. And it's not comfortable to sit with that, particularly as a parent, when our kids want their own thing, but also we want to nurture people building their own sense of what they want, because this is where their sense of identity comes from. But there will be this tug of war very often around, what do I want versus what do parents want? What does society want? What does my country want? What does my community want? What does my boss want from me? So it can be a difficult question to navigate that. So I just want to ask you guys for a moment, and maybe drop something in the chat. Can you identify something that you want most in your life? And I'm leaving this very open. This could be a concept, or this could be a value, or this could be a material thing. This could be an idea. I just saw party flashing up. I love that. Oh, fantastic, guys. Yeah, happy family, peace of mind, good life for my kids. I want to add a slightly different, but maybe not that different question. But sometimes a few different answers come out of this. What do you wish most for your loved ones, such as kids, parents, friends, colleagues, everybody in the world, perhaps? Does anything change between what do you want for yourself and what do you wish for your loved ones? Yeah, I see a lot of the same ones pop up. Fantastic. Loving the engagement, guys. Superpowers. Yes. Oh, I would love to talk for the next half hour about the superpowers. Maybe next time. So here's what occurred to me at some point. I do want to give a nod to Nash Popovich, one of my early mentors and dear friend now, who kind of kickstarted the development of this. What I found, and that really made sense to me over the years, is that what matters most to people is existence, agency, and happiness. So let me tell you a little bit more about it, paint a picture around each of these so you know what I mean. And I'll use those big questions as a guiding point. Existence, I think, comes in two sort of categories. One is physical. How do I literally survive? I mean, we care most about existence because, we want to be here rather than not to be here. And I know that there's people who do not want to be here, but generally people care massively about being there rather than being dead. And just take a moment to appreciate the energy that can get released when people's existence is threatened. The amount of power that comes from that, the things that people do. I love that coaching question. What if somebody had a gun to your head and you needed to reach that goal you just told me about, your 10-year goal in, let's say, 6 months, or your 6 months goal in 3 weeks? What would you do? If somebody literally had a gun to your head and said, I love that scene in Fight Club when he takes that person's driving license and says, I'm going to find you, I'm going to kill you unless you go to school and you study and you do this and you do that. The amount of energy that develops from that is incredible. How do I live healthy? A lot of people come to coaching for health reasons. So they do care about that physical element of existence. Now, there's a philosophical element to existence, which is some of what we just discussed. Why am I here? What does it mean to be human? With the emergence of AI, we will have to ask ourselves a lot of questions around what does it mean to be human? As technology gets implemented into our bodies more and more, and many of our jobs will be taken over by artificial intelligence in the next coming decades. We will need to ask ourselves some really tough questions around that. Who am I? What's the point? Is this real? I have a friend who believes you can't shake the thought that he's in the Matrix, that this is a simulation of some sort. What happens after we die? What happens when this body is no more? Does consciousness move on somewhere? Does that mean a form of existence? So we care deeply about existence. We ask ourselves those questions. Similar in the department of agency, freedom and autonomy we're talking about here. Coaching essentially is about agency. How can I be free in a world full of restrictions? How do I make the right choices? How do I balance what I want and what others expect from me? And in many religions, in many philosophies, that those questions exist around what can I change, what can I not change, and how might I tell the difference between those? And I think coaching is a way of helping people to open up those doors around what can I change and what maybe I cannot change. I'm not a fan of the idea that anybody can be anything that they want. I do believe there's certain limitations from genetics, from what our bodies are. We cannot fly without help. So these are things that I do think limit us, and there's some comfort in that. But to make the decisions on which one we can affect and which ones we can't is quite important. Happiness. Hold on. Let me just move this around. Happiness. There's many questions around that. How can I be happy? What makes life worth living? What should I do with my life? Where do I belong? What do I want? How can I live authentically? How can I live in line with my values and my beliefs? How do I get along with others? There's so many different aspects of happiness, and I brought you some theories about how we might be able to make sense of that. But these things matter. Is there a God? Is this real? How can I tell right from wrong? How can I find love? And again, I want to take that opportunity for you to just pop a few questions in the chat. Something that you might have asked yourself, some of these big questions, perhaps some questions that you recognize from your clients as they come into the coaching room, or something that you feel might be happening underneath some of those questions. What question is behind which career do I go to, or how do I resolve this conflict? What am I going to eat today? I love that, because some people despair over the question of what am I going to eat today? Because often beyond the question of what am I going to eat today, there might be a question around how can I make the right choice? How do I not miss out on the best possible experience? We all know some people who seem to find it very difficult to make a decision what to eat for lunch, because you can never recreate that experience at that time. Every choice excludes other possibilities. So what am I going to eat today can actually be a quite existential question once you shine a light on it and go a little bit deeper. I see a question around money. Money is always a means to an end. I've yet to meet a person who wants money for the sake of having money. It usually leads to something: status, security, freedom, autonomy, happiness, relationships, doing the right thing, leaving a legacy, feeling good about yourself. All of these elements can be there. So I always encourage coaches to just consider that deeper level. What big questions are behind some of those? I don't want to call them small questions because they're important questions, but what's the next level? Great. Thank you so much, guys. So to explore what matters, we got three elements. Existence, we can explore with existential philosophy. It's a method of of a methodology to find out what it means to be, what it means to exist, what are the bare bones of existence. Happiness, positive psychology is all about happiness and well-being, what's right with people, and coaching is all about agency. So let me say a few bits more. Existentialism in a nutshell. Well, LOL. It's going to be difficult to sum up existentialism in a nutshell, but let me give it a try. So it's a philosophy of human lived experience. It's making sense of what it means to be human, what we call the human condition. You know, we can ask questions and use philosophy as a means to get closer to some of those answers. What are the results of being alive and in the world with other people? And I mentioned some of these existential concerns. You know, at the core of human existence, there lies death and temporality, endings, with death as the ultimate ending. That's some of those elements that are always with us as a result of being human. You know, we are condemned to be free, as Sartre said. So we have to make choices, but we also get to make choices. So freedom is an inherent quality of the human condition, which, people generally consider it as something that is very positive. But, if you look at having all of the choices and having to decide and then needing to carry the responsibility for what we choose and what we decide, responsibility weighs heavily on people, and freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. Isolation, I mentioned earlier, we cannot be the same as somebody else. It's impossible. So we're human beings with a need to belong, social animals. But at the same time, we cannot be the same. Nobody can fully understand us and grasp us. We cannot figure another person out completely. It's impossible. And the question around meaning, we are meaning-making machines in a world where we cannot be sure if it has inherent meaning. We can only have faith that there is meaning to life and existence as a whole. But we can create meaning in our lives. But that might be very different to everybody else's. So these are some of the concerns that existentialists have been thinking about. These lead to a paradox and dilemma and anxiety. There's a base level of anxiety that we cannot make go away. Uncertainty, choice, responsibility, change, purpose, direction. Sartre famously said hell is other people, because we always compare ourselves and we can't really help it at some level. Everything ends. There's an inherent absurdity in life and living. We cannot be sure whether things have meaning. We like to attach meaning to things, but maybe some things are just absurd. So that's the existential position, that at the core of life and existence, it might just be absurd. So these are some of the themes that pop up. And what I like about the existential framework is that it's holistic, it's universal, and it's inevitable. We will all get in touch with those existential givens and concerns, those boundary situations where we get faced with our human condition. They're inevitable. Somebody's going to die. You will die at some point. So we will face endings, small and large. So it relates to everybody. Everybody gets it experientially, if we allow ourselves to look. And I want to say more about each of these authors and writers and thinkers, but I'll put a few out there if you want to go further. So positive psychology is a science. It's empirical perspectives on ideas that aren't necessarily new. It's a branch of science. We use the scientific process to figure things out. We look at what's right with people. What are their resources? What's already going well? What might we be able to build on? What are positive emotions actually good for? What about people at their best? What's optimal human functioning? How can people use their strength? It's so useful to look at what's already going well and what might we be able to build on. What I find particularly useful as a coach is to have a language to talk about what happiness and well-being actually is. What constitutes, what are the pillars of a good life? Because it allows me to talk about it with my clients. Maybe not in the terminology from positive psychology, but it allows me to explore with what people ultimately want. Ultimately, they want some form of happiness, whether that's a life of meaning or whether that's positive emotions, whether that's health or self-acceptance, whether that's a sense of growth and change. ultimately, every coaching client that has ever stepped foot into my consulting room wanted some form or some element of what I'll soon to present in those well-being theories. And that was really important for me because I realized positive psychology is always relevant to coaching. Positive psychology has also branched out in other areas like resilience and post-traumatic growth. How can we grow after trauma and adversity? How can we build the resilience to bounce back quicker when things happen that unsettle us? And we have created a lot of interventions, applying research to the real world that people can use to affect certain areas of their life. And there's a wealth of tools and techniques in there for coaches. It's not sufficient on its own. It was always meant to complete psychology as a whole. But in psychology, people hadn't really looked at what's right with people. We tend to throw money at research when something's wrong and then we want to fix it. But going back to zero doesn't necessarily mean a good life. And it's been exploding over the last 20 years. It's only been around as an academic branch of science since 1999. So it's really a baby science, and I think that's important to say. It gives us some new perspectives on these existing ideas. It's important to note that it's rebalancing what we call the deficit approach, what's wrong with people and how to fix it. It's important to look at some of our weaknesses and how we might be able to work with that. But it's more important to look at what's working. Maybe not more important, but certainly rebalancing it. It's equally important. And some of the research suggests that it's more important. So it adds some scientific understanding to the coaching process. And a lot of the research in coaching has actually come from positive psychology. And there's generally two camps, the ones that create knowledge and the ones that apply it. So here's my favorite theory around well-being and happiness, which is Carol Riff's and Key's psychological well-being theory. I did link a questionnaire there, so you can go to that questionnaire and do a little scale and have a little snapshot of where you are on these 6 elements. I've mentioned them all before. I won't read them to you. Perhaps the environmental mastery one is I haven't mentioned yet, because it seems an important factor of well-being to have the skills to deal with whatever is in your environment. Different skill sets depending on different environments. We need a different skill set if we are hunting for food in the jungle or hunting for money in the jungle of a large city. So all of these are important. Some are more important to a few people than to others, but I think it gives you a really good framework for what might matter to people. So as coaches, you might, something I have done is to put this in the kind of wheel of life format. You can have this as a conversation. You can offer a client a questionnaire like that. But what I want is to have that in the back of my mind if somebody comes to me as a coach and says, I want to be happier. I'm very curious about each of these areas. Similar with Martin Seligman's PERMA theory, a theory on flourishing that includes positive emotions and engagement, being engaged in life, finding flow. Positive relationships is always one of the biggest factors in happiness. Living a life of meaning, a purposeful existence, and having a sense of achievement and accomplishment. And that one was not in previous well-being theories, but specifically around coaching, there is happiness in something. And that's why we set goals and we achieve them and we have that serotonin kick. It feels really good. It might not last particularly long, depending on how we set up those goals. We can set infinite goals that keep on giving, that have milestones in there, so we keep having a sense of achievement in our lives. But have a little look at those. The book Flourishing in 2011 is really good as well to give you a good overview over where we are with regards to positive psychology and the science. Here's something I created earlier this year, in which I've drawn together the main well-being theories and the main elements in well-being theories. Many of those already will seem familiar with you from what I've just shown you. These are in the inner circle. And then in the outer circle, there's lots of elements that we have strong evidence that didn't make it in the main theories as an individual pillar, but certainly it's what we have strong evidence for affecting psychological well-being and happiness. So I'll send you those slides later. I'm happy for you to write me an email as well. I can always send those to you. But again, you can make your own map. Ideally, your client makes their own map. You know, we don't have to rely on the science when we're sitting one-to-one with a client, because they might tell us, oh, but like, here's something that matters to me. And if it matters to them deeply and it's not in this list, in this terminology, it doesn't matter. Work with what's important to your client. You know, but it might help me to have some of those science in my head and say, oh, that's interesting that, you know, that contributes to your happiness, when perhaps the research might say that it doesn't. You know, so then we can have an interested conversation around that. And this, I think, is where the science can really inform our coaching. You know, we can offer different perspectives on it. And depending on what kind of coach you are, you might bring some of the science into the coaching space. Coaching in a nutshell, well, LOL, once more. Definitions of coaching vary considerably. And I reckon there's as many different definitions of coaching in this room as there are coaches in this room. So I don't want to get into all the ins and outs and the complexity of what coaching is and isn't, and where the range is and who's right and who's coaching wrong. And that's an interesting definition. I have another talk on that. But here's a model that I really like. This is Eric Dehaan's playing field from his book Relational Coaching, which I recommend. Is probably one of my favorites. But he proposes a 2x2 matrix of suggesting and exploring, and confronting and supporting. So a coach might go all over this field when we're working with a client, but you may also have an area where you're most comfortable. For example, I'm most comfortable, most natural in the challenging and the exploring sector, you know, the insight-focused kind of coaching. Another coach might have strong influences of suggesting. They might put a lot of ideas on the table. They might be very supportive and maybe not so much challenging, you know, and that's also very valuable. I think ultimately my aspiration is to be able to move all over this field as a coach, as my client needs and wants that, you know. But especially when you're starting out, it's perfectly fine to frame your space somewhere on this spectrum, to say, this is the kind of coaching I do. Here's what comes naturally to me. Here's where I offer value. And if you're looking for the insight, that's solution focused, and you're looking for your client is looking more for an insight focused approach, then that's okay. You know, then you can recommend them somebody who does that kind of work. So it helps to make sense of coaching in this way. And again, I have linked a questionnaire there to a psychometric that Eric developed at Ashridge Center for Coaching, where you can actually get a sense based on some questions about where your strength lies as a coach. What is your coaching behavior? And that can be quite insightful. I reckon many of you will already have a sense for this, but it's a useful tool to use. Here's how Farley and Stout have made sense of the different roles in coaching. And I'm showing this. I hope you disagree passionately with a lot of this, because I certainly did on some areas. I've kind of modified that a little bit, but over the last 10 years of working with coaches, I had to realize that coaching seems to be more like this, you know? If you ask coaches, they transcend traditional boundaries, and academics might say that's coaching and that's not coaching, but coaching is an unregulated profession, and you know that's a blessing and a curse, you know. But I view it over the years much more as a blessing than a curse. I try to protect what I think coaching is, but I think it's important that other coaches who think radically different about coaching than me are still out there doing amazing work with the clients that are a good match for their coaching. I think as long as you frame your space and you say, that's coaching for me, and your client says, yes, I want to work with you based on what you told them, then I think you've done a good job, you know? So I'll leave it at that. What's important is that we integrate, I think. What I often tell my students is who you are is how you coach. And that means that the person you are, the authentic you, is going to be a valuable coach. If you create a space for people and to help them and to figure something out, and you're curious and you're authentic, and you want to help them, whether that's through suggestions or exploration, whether that's through support or confrontation, that's going to be valuable. So I've seen many coaches who try to make themselves into coaches that they are not. And sometimes you can achieve that kind of transition and really learn to listen and to hold back from the advice, but sometimes it might be more valuable to just kind of go with what comes naturally to you, and then just make sure that that coaching style is a good match for your client. So integration comes from making something whole. Somebody who's integer is whole, so I think when we look at different elements in different areas from coaching, philosophically, psychologically, and we bring those together, we can create something that's quite strong. And this was my motivation to bring together existential ideas and positive psychology, because I had my positive psychology lens on when I got in touch with the existential ideas, and that really helped. It seems paradox in a way to bring positive psychology that is quite seen as very positive, and very about what's right with people, and then you have existentialism that seems to be quite dark and lacking the joy of living, as Paul Wong wrote about it. But positive psychology ignoring many of what the challenges, the suffering that is inherent in the human condition. I always felt that a lot of positive psychologists were too positive. And I always felt that many existentialists were too negative. So for me, we can go through the spectrum of what happens with people. And so positive psychology lacking in depth, and existentialism lacking what Paul Wong calls in youthful vitality. It made perfect sense for me to bring these two together. And that was before I read Paul Wong. I can recommend to look into the work. So for me, it made perfect sense to embed the tools and techniques, the terminologies, the conceptualizations from positive psychology, the strength frameworks and the questionnaires to measure success, to the understanding of what positive emotions are good for, and understanding people at their best, and embed that into this existential framework that gave me a sense of who is that person in front of me? How can I make sense of people as a whole? Where do people exist across the dimensions? What's your relationship with yourself? What's your relationship with endings? What's your relationship with responsibility? So these bigger questions, they build this framework for me to relate to people and to understand people, to understand myself and my relationships with myself and other people. And then I had this plethora of tools from positive psychology to work with people towards what they want most, some form of happiness. So that made perfect sense. So for me, this is developing an existential mindset, developing existential intelligence, embracing that there are contradictions in the human condition. That just being human is a courageous act. It requires courage to engage with life, to not hide from it, to open your eyes, to keep it real, if you will, to realize that there is no such thing as a perfect human being, and that we cannot strive towards perfection because, what does that even mean? To learn to be resilient, to be flexible, to deal with these paradoxes that we all have inside, those mutually exclusive, not mutually exclusive, it's paradox, they're both. We both want to belong and we want to be individual. We want to have certainty and we want to have uncertainty because it keeps life exciting. We don't like death and endings, but they give meaning and provide meaning to our existence and to anything that happens in between. So how can we embrace that? Learning to embrace those existential givens that every human being has, and we cannot avoid unless we stop existing or we continue to suppress it and distract ourselves. And I think this is why the lockdown, it's 2020, and lots of people had lots of time to think about those kind of questions. And maybe it's the first time that you became still after you've worked for 20, 30 years. So is an important time for these kind of questions. So developing this existential mindset, existential intelligence, and then adding positive psychology into the mix, adding science to the philosophy, understanding happiness, developing a language to talk about it. working with strength, working with resources, working with what's already going well, work solution focused, being able to offer happiness boosts as some of our work with clients, if that's needed. And studying and developing resilience. Plus, and you may be familiar with a 42. One of the theories is that the Hitchhiker's Galaxy's 42 came from the computer language ASCII, in which the asterisk, which is what the 42 stands for whatever you want it to be. And I do believe coaching for many people is whatever they want it to be. And so I want to go away from what I define as coaching and open positive existentialism up to any sort of coaching. Maybe not all forms of coaching, but there's certainly something in there for any coach. And no matter how you define coaching, I think positive existentialism can elevate and inform your practice and open more doors to go a few levels underneath.
Sorry, Yannick, to interrupt you. I see that question here. How can we work with the conflict of emotional choice versus rational choice?
That's a great question. I think I'm about to answer it. Maybe in a more general way, but maybe I can draw on that example. That emotional choice, that difficult to make some of those choices. So in practice, generally there are no formulas or recipes for the human encounter. I think when we help somebody make choices like that and meet these kind of conflicting wants and needs, when we meet a dilemma, a paradox, a choice where it's not clear and it might never be clear and there might not exist a right or wrong, how do we deal with that? And I think, first of all, we need to create a space where somebody can deal with it. I don't need to know the answers. I don't need to make that choice for you. What I can do for you as a coach is I can hold that space for you. I can reflect back what you seem to be telling me. You can hear yourself talk, and I can help you explore. There's something in existential practice we call phenomenological inquiry. It takes years to even say it, and it takes some time to actually practice it and learn how to do it, because the idea in phenomenological inquiry is that we bracket what we think we know. We bracket our answers that we think we might have. And even if we have a very strong sense for what my answer to your question is, I want to put that in my box, I want to put the lid on, and I want to push that into the corner of the room for the time being. And I want to really tune in, and I want to be in your shoes. I want to help you explore this and find your own answers. Because the big questions in life, they don't have one answer. They have your answers. Now there's many answers, and many people will try to give you answers and say, I figured it out. Here's the answer to how you navigate life, or what's right and what's wrong. And that can be really helpful, but at some point we will probably need to question that. And you might arrive at the same answer that you've already had. But I think it's important to go through a process to allow yourself to have the courage to question what you think you know. And when it comes to making difficult choices or even impossible choices, the coach holding a space, not jumping in to rescue you, not giving you other people's answers or their answer, but to help you grapple with the process of finding an answer, even if it's an impossible one. That's the existential characteristic of this work. We're working forward, we're working with what's going right, but we are allowing our clients to really grapple with this, to appreciate that life and choosing the right path and making emotional choices is difficult, and everybody has to go through it. That's just to be expected. So there's a plethora of tools. How much time do we have left?
We are over a minute now.
Oh, great. Fantastic. So there's a plethora of positive psychology tools and techniques, and I'll leave you to explore those, from strengths to questionnaires to interventions. There is a lot. 20 years of science have come up with quite a few tools. So I do encourage you to go out and explore, and I hope that I could open some of these doors for you to be curious about that. Just very briefly, a coaching process could include first of all, adopting this mindset, reflecting before the session, reviewing some of the context. I always use some mindfulness before each session just to ground myself and see where I'm at and what I'm feeling and what's going on for me, so that then I can meet my client as a fellow human being. I can be with them, which is the foundation. I can then do things with them, like contracting, creating the space, agreeing on a goal. And then I can draw on whatever processes, techniques, interventions, exercises, all of that coaching stuff that is really helpful. I can, guided by my intuition and relevant theory, have that interplay between being with my client and doing things with them. And that, as you can tell, is quite open. My main tools are using what's happening here and now between me and my client, and using the phenomenological way of inquiry. And there's positive psychology coming in that helps me evaluate progress, taking stock, and then at the end I can recontract or exit. And I always take some notes, I reflect supervision. I cannot highlight the importance of supervision enough when we do deep work and managing the big questions. How far can we go as coaches? Again, this is another talk. I'm happy to provide a link to that. And continuous learning. And you are all here for continuous learning. I'll skip these two models. They are in the Existential Coaching Handbook by Monica Hanaway. But just a brief look will already tell you that there's areas in there. You can look at it as a positive existential grow if you wanted to. But it just goes that step deeper. So take-home messages. Coaching can be a really viable tool to explore life's big questions. Sometimes coaching is not the right tool to explore life's big questions. It depends on where the client is and how far you as a coach are willing and able to go with your client. People care most about existence, happiness, and agency, as far as I'm concerned. Any coach's practice will benefit from an awareness of these existential, foundational concerns that people bring and bring into the coaching room. And that existential philosophy encourages us to sit with that, to not jump in and rescue, but to sit with it, accept, and perhaps even embrace life's paradoxes and dilemmas as the kind of stuff that makes life interesting and exciting. And there's a lot of tools in positive psychology, knowledge and tools around all things well-being. So it's well worth exploring. And I'm a fan of integration. I'm doing quite naturally. But I think if you want to take your coaching to the next level, look at the different areas that you have access to, and this might be music, and it might be biology, and it might be business. Whatever access you have to areas of expertise, you can usually have transferable knowledge, bring it together, and create something that is more whole than it was before. Thank you very much. That was me. I did write a few books around this. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper, these are quite introductory and specifically for coaches. The two at the bottom you can download from my website. So if you go to existential.coach or rocketsupervision.com, you'll find them there. And I do run some training in positive psychology specifically for coaches. So if you're interested in that, jump on it. Plus, I'm writing some nuggets, a newsletter, if you wanted to, every month. And that's just a few pieces of my mind. If you wanted to stay in touch, that's probably the best way. Always happy to hear from you. So if you want to write me an email or give me a call, I say my doors are almost always open. Thank you.
Wow, that's a great session, Yannick. Really, really powerful, really powerful. I think everyone would agree with me that wow, a great session. And I would say this has opened, as an Agile coach, where do you take your journey in understanding professional coaching? That's something great. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your sharing your knowledge with us. So great. So we are above our time box. So any we've got feedback link in the chat. Please do provide us feedback. Joseph just sent me a message saying any questions on his session. He has moved the discussion to swap card attendee forum. If you have anything to discuss, please raise those questions in the attendee forum, and he'll be happy to answer them. All right. And before we move on to open forum, just a reminder for tomorrow. Tomorrow's theme is growing as coach. We are running a coaches clinic. Feel free to join. If you have anything, any topic to be coached on, join and get coached. If you want to do a reverse coaching and get feedback on your coaching, please try that out. And use the social media, hashtag ACR online. All the slides and recording would be uploaded on Swapcard shortly. And I think there are a few sessions which have been uploaded from previous days. Feel free to access them on Swapcard. All right. So I'll pass the control back to you, Mark. And that's it. Thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks, Yannick, again.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Yannick. All I'm going to do in terms of control is open the mic, so you can now unmute yourself. Have a chat as long as Yannick is prepared to stay around for as well. But the mic can now be unmuted.
Yannick, there are a few questions in the chat window. If you want to take that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult for me to thank you guys for the amazing feedback. If you have some questions that you can see, feel free maybe to read them out to me.
Sure. Madhuri.
Okay. Sure.
Oh, that's much. Here we go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Madhi.
Sometimes what people want might not be what they actually need. So how could we handle that as coaches if we see this?
So what was the first part? Sometimes what
people want might not be what they actually need. So how could we handle that as coaches if we see this?
Yeah, right. This is a difficult one when we it's one of those moments where we as coaches, we might see that what that client in front of me wants. And we know that if they would get that, they tell me, this is what I call the presenting issue. Somebody comes in and says, very crude example, it's like, I want to lose weight. And then you explore a little bit further, why they want to lose weight and what it might give them if they were to lose the weight. And they said, well, I want to feel better about myself. And perhaps you have this insight while exploring that maybe it's not about the weight. Maybe there's something else that you might want to explore in order to, befriend yourself, to, like yourself, or to have that sense of self-esteem or self-respect. So it's difficult as a coach I don't want to jump in and say, no, that's not what you want. Here's what you want. Trust me, because I want to bracket that, I want to bracket at first what I think I know about human beings and what I think I know about this person, because I've just met them. My stance as an existentialist is my client knows themselves much better than I will ever know them, because they have access to all of the information that they need to make decisions for themselves. And even if I was right, even if I end up being right and they really needed something different and I could have told them, will they really be like, oh yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Sometimes they will, but then you have come in as a coach and you saved them. And there's value to that. But you're taking a lot of empowerment away from your client because they weren't the one who decided which path to go. Your client wasn't the one who says, I figured it out. I don't think I really want that. I think what I need is something else. And that is so valuable to come to that conclusion yourself, because then it's not somebody else saving you. Then it's you having gone through a process where you realized that what you needed was something other than initially you said you wanted. And I think that's an important process.
Yeah. Yannick, there's two more questions actually. From what we hear, how could anyone go on and push a whole framework into an organization, into a human collaborative system?
Oh, can you read that again to me?
Yeah, from what we hear, how could anyone go on and push a whole framework into an organization?
How to push a
whole framework into an organization?
To an organization.
Into a human collaborative system.
Ooh. Whoever posted that question, are you still here? Could we talk about this?
If no, then I'll just move on to the next question. What's the minimum one could
Oh,
consider?
sorry. Because it sounded super, super interesting. I would love to talk about it, but I'm not quite clear what
Okay.
you wanted. No, okay, maybe we move on. Because
Okay.
I could start like to talk about, well, how do we put these kind of frameworks into organizations? But then I think it always depends on what does that organization want? Where's the agenda? Who is the agenda supported by? And whose space are we holding? Are we working with the whole organization? Are we working with the leadership team? Are we working with people bottom up? Christina, was it you? Frederick? No, left. I don't think your left is my left.
Rohit, I guess there's somebody who has posted this question and he's saying that he's not able to unmute. Nando,
I see.
yeah. Can we
Andreas? It was Andreas.
Mike.
Yep.
I think the permissions are
worked.
set.
Hey,
Mike.
Hey.
Hey.
Yeah, I feel relieved. So that has already done the job.
See, for me, Mike is here.
Right. Unlock my life. No, it was a complicated formulation, but agile coaching, I think everybody most people here on the call are aware of this, has a lot of biases, carries a lot of biases with it. And it's actually a little bit of a contradiction, because we go into an organization more like a sports coach and believe, hey, we can understand the organization like a sports team. And of course, I mean, we can talk about your weaknesses, but you've got to play this team, this sports, and I know how to make it better, right? I don't believe this is useful, helpful, and even possible. And that was where my question came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I don't think, I mean, we have learned a lot. The positive psychologist in me, talking about different senses of identity, the positive psychologist in me thinks we have understood so much about human beings, about optimal human functioning, about how teams work most efficiently, how we can help organizations to build better relationships, to boost efficiency, to up resilience, there's so much we have now understood where we can say, here are 10 ways in which you can operate at a higher level. Here's how you swing your arm in tennis and it will get better. I can guarantee it, or I can almost guarantee it. But I think when it comes to people and when it comes to complex organizational systems, at some point, that is just no longer true. It's no longer helpful to say, here's the blueprint for success. Because all of you will know that there's plenty of blueprints for success out there, but they don't work for everybody. You have to find quite a specific person or quite a specific organization in order for that to work. So I think as a coach, it's more helpful for me to tune in and to give them a space to consider all the aspects and elements that are involved in the system, and then to make some of those complex decisions where there might not be a right and wrong. There are some systems in which there are some answers. I do believe that some answers exist. I do believe some facts exist, but when it comes to very complex environments, there tends to be no straightforward way or one size fits all solution. It's got to be a process, and that person I'm working with has all the answers.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
So that would basically tend to coaching more, in let's say in favor of the client's agenda, and the client can be a system, as you said before. It's different possible levels. It could be an individual, a team, an organization, or whatever. We're coaching them, and we might help them to gain more awareness to do the rest for themselves, where we could again coach them, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of going in and say, I've got a game here, they should play the game, and I coach you how to do it.
Yeah,
that would be a little bit of a shortcut to me, and that what you just said helped a lot. Thank you.
Uh-huh. And I just want to make sure I say this, that the coaches who do come in and say, I know your system inside out, I've been operating within that system for 40 years, I have some answers, and I'm going to put them on the table, and you can tell me whether those answers make sense for your organization or not. And I think there's a lot of value in that. but it's a very different way of helping, and research has shown that one way of helping isn't necessarily better than the other. They're just different ways of helping. And in some contexts, the more suggestive approach might be more valuable than the more explorative approach, especially when there's a very heavy time limit. If you have 45 minutes with a client and that decision has to be made in an hour, or the email needs to go out, maybe you do want to put some stuff on the table. Mm-hmm. But I think it's more sustainable and certainly more empowering if your client goes through a process where they find answers, and you, as a coach, you hold that space.
Right. Awesome talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mike.
Yannick, we have one more question. What's the minimum one could consider doing it emotionally detach themselves from the client's problem?
What's the minimum to detach yourself from the client's problem?
Yes, emotionally detach yourself from the client's problem. How can we do that? Yeah.
Why would you emotionally detach yourself from the client's problem? I mean, I have some assumptions around that, and I'm happy to put them in. But again, if you're here, I'd happy to have the conversation.
Hi, Yannick. Can you hear me?
Hey, Rishi. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for the really energizing this one speech. I think it really is good. And psychology is one of my subjects as well. I really am interested in that. What I felt is when you're talking to your client, and the client, it happened to me that the client, instead of dealing with the day-to-day team-related problem, came up with a personal one where there was some personal journey with his family going through, and then that he brought in as a subject to be dealt with. Somewhere down the line, I may have seen that happening as well with me, and I kind of directly connected, and instead of actually helping the client go into the problem that he is looking to find solutions, I kind of felt empathized, and I was into the problem myself rather than helping.
Right. You got stuck in the problem.
Yeah. So how do you basically, what needs to happen in your, let's say, mental state that you probably detach yourself from that situation and then try and help the coach, the coachee?
Great question, Rishi. Thank you for bringing that into the space. Where do I start? First of all, often when we market ourselves as coaches, we put ourselves out, our authentic selves out there, right? We tell people what we believe in, and we may start with why. We show people who we are so that we build a relationship, But if we have very authentic marketing and very transparent, perhaps even vulnerable ways to put ourselves out there, we tend to attract people who are more similar to us. A lot of coaches market themselves with their story. What they've worked through, what they then help others with. I see that a lot, that, I struggled with certainly something like, I don't know, for me personally, I moved from being quite a drifter to being quite focused and committed, and that's a journey I found I help a lot of others with, quite naturally. But that also means that whenever we do something like that, we attract people that trigger us all over the place, because they went through similar stories or they have similar emotions. And then it's easy to make assumptions that what they're going through is also what we went through. And sometimes that's spot on. And, what worked for us might also work for them. But, chances are, phenomenologically and existentially, everybody's experience is quite unique. It's never exactly as it was for us, even though there might be some parallels. So the challenge is that when we work with a client and they tell us about something that we've experienced and that was very difficult, or maybe something that we are still experiencing at the moment and that is still difficult for us, a client going through a divorce and we're going through a divorce, or have gone through a divorce and it's still painful. It's easy to get distracted by that and then to make assumptions. So when we get stuck with a client situation, there's the two most important things, I think, is first to ground yourself before the session or before the client, to know yourself to an extent where you are aware what's with you. Is that fight I had yesterday still with me? Is that breakup from 5 years ago still with me? How do these things affect me emotionally? And notice those triggers in the moment as you're with the client, in the here and now. You might get quite emotional, not because of empathizing with the client, but because you get reminded emotionally what you went through as a human being, and I think it can be really helpful to be aware of those kind of things. First of all, because it helps to make a relationship. I may or may not share something that I went through with a client, but sometimes it can really help so that client knows they're not the only ones going through these kind of journeys. But I always acknowledge that my experience with this is quite different. And I often might say something as a coach is like, this, as I'm hearing you speak, this really relates to me. I was going through something that on the surface sounds quite similar. And I can certainly feel a lot right now. I can feel your pain. I've went through a fair share of mine. And if you formulate it in that way, it builds that emotional connection between you two. But at the same time, it communicates that I think your situation is probably different to mine, yet I empathize. And the second important point here is supervision. When you work with clients that you feel emotionally close to, it is absolutely crucial to have somebody to talk to where you make space for your own experience so that you can separate what's my stuff and what's the client's stuff. Do I feel this way because of my interaction with a client, or do I feel this way because of something that has been triggered? So grounding yourself beforehand, noticing what's coming up in the session, and attending regular supervision is what I would recommend in those situations.
Completely makes sense. Thank you very much.
If I have time for one more, I have time for one more. Rohit, is it okay?
Yeah.
Mavidi?
Yes.
If may I come back to the previous question, Yannick, you said, one thing I like to say myself, that we are in a complex situation. And one of the descriptions of a complex situation that there is no strict causality. So it's not necessarily what the current situation is caused by some issue earlier. And even if I afterwards, in a retrospective, I can figure out what went on and what was the cause in the current moment, even if I do the same steps, it possibly leads to a different conclusion. So it doesn't make sense in a mechanical sense to have this cause-effect diagram, because it is not, you can learn from it. What you can learn, identify what happened and figure out what would be your next try, what you can then inspect and then later adapt. So this is an agile manner. It is the basic for or should be at least the basics for our agile thinking. And I think in a similar coaching situation as well. So it's not only that I empathize with them and identify that even if I went through, let's say, divorce and they are in a similar situation, that it's different because we are different persons, but even if they would do the same things again, it not necessarily would conclude in the same ending. So we are free on our choices, but it's up to us how we go on.
Yeah, thank you. Is there a question in there?
Sorry, it wasn't really a question. It was an addendum, let's say. It was my thought about it. If you need a question, I can formulate one.
No, I appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Shall we do one more question? I think I saw one in the chat just coming up.
Yes, it's there, Arijar, for you. I love the insights and integration of positive psychology. But don't you think that negative emotions can also be integrated, as this negative emotions alert us that something needs to change and motivate us to make that change?
Absolutely. And I think what I'm proposing is to integrate, negative emotions are very important and we know they help us survive. Disgust makes us not to eat something. Fear makes us alert to fight or to run away. Sadness alerts us to something that is painful. Pain helps us literally to survive. People who don't feel pain tend to not live very long. So they have a very evolutionary purpose, and they're very good teachers. It's similar with anxiety. When we feel anxious, I think anxiety can be such a useful teacher. And I think it's important to distinguish between the kind of anxiety that is perhaps unnecessary and we can alleviate it, such as being nervous ahead of a presentation where really we don't have much to lose, or any sort of anxiety that we can, the uncertainty where we can just learn something, have some conversations, study, research, and create knowledge. Then we're not uncertain anymore. If we have uncertainty around whether we want to take this job, maybe we have a couple of conversations with people who are in the job, and then we create some knowledge that takes away the uncertainty, it takes away the anxiety. So there is anxiety we can just eliminate, through a process. And but there's also the existential anxiety, and the existential anxiety is one of those so-called negative emotions that can be really, really valuable. Because when we sit with that kind of anxiety, we can really learn something about ourselves. Whenever we have a strong emotion, regardless if the emotion is positive or negative, or rather, to put it better, comfortable or maybe uncomfortable. Whenever we have a strong emotion, there's something that is to learn. Because usually very strong emotions, they point us to something that is important to us. Either elevated when we laugh out loud. There's something that has been touched on, something that is a part of us, something that characterizes us because it made us laugh. Or maybe if we get really, really angry or irritated, there's something there, maybe a value that got attacked, or something that somebody's violated our code of ethics. This is wrong. And maybe we wouldn't have noticed that we think that's wrong until we got angry about something and then actually took the time to reflect on, what was that about? Why did I get so angry? Why did I get so irritated? I don't really care about this stuff. It's like, well, if you don't care about it, why are you being emotional? So these are the times in coaching when we can use emotions, whether they're strong or whether they're subtle and creeping. When we pay attention to the kind of emotional reactions on the periphery of what we meet with a client, not the outbursts of rage, but maybe the slight twitching in the cheek, or maybe the tapping of the foot as a slight nervousness or anxiety. If as a coach we pick up on those kind of things, we have an opening into who that person is in front of us. And they have an opening into learning something about themselves and what they care about. And when we do that well, then people build a more coherent, more solid framework of who they are and what they care about. And that's the basis from which to make decisions, even in the face of uncertainty. We can move forward having the faith that we can make the best decision at the time, even if it turns out to be the wrong decision.
Yannick, shall we take one last question, please?
Happy to.
Thank you so much. When you see that a client understands their situation and gets clear at an intellectual level, but fails to act on their understanding, what can we explore to help them get into action, either at individual level or collective level?
When you see that a client understands their situation and they're clear at an intellectual level, but they fail to act on that understanding, what can we explore to help them get into action? It happens a lot that a client, and me including that, I'm a client with my own coach as well. It happens very, very often that I know what the right thing to do is. I've intellectually understood what I need to do, but I'm still not doing it, because I still have an emotional barrier there. I'm just not doing it. That can be a really painful place. It can be, that's the kind of source for beating yourself up, because now we know better, but we're not doing better. That creates a divide. It creates a conflict between what we know we need to do and what we're doing. That's very difficult. And I think the ways to facilitate action on that depends really on the kind of coach that you are. You can have conversations, explore that more, figure out what is at the root of this. We can work directly with the emotions. So there'll be NLP works directly with emotions. Cognitive behavioral coaching works directly with emotions. We can do exercises around releasing of emotions. We can do some reprogramming. We can work with very clear goals. We can work with accountability. And I had a client that was so blocked, and they were absolutely clear exactly what they needed to do. And at some point, after trying lots of different things, what worked was, how about you transfer me an amount of money that's gonna hurt you? And if you do it by Monday, you know exactly what to do. We've talked it all through. If you do it by Monday, I'll transfer it all back to you. And he's like, okay. First of all, there was a conversation about, yes, they were really committed. It wasn't about that. But they just needed to get over themselves. They just needed to jump. So they're like, how about 50 quid? And I said, how about 500? So that was an interesting moment. But in the end, they chose that was probably going to work. So they transferred me £500 there and then while they were on the phone. And by Monday, they had done it. I transferred the £500 back. It's like such a powerful tool, this accountability. It's not a long-term solution. Chances are something else might happen where maybe that's needed again and I might not be there. But in this example, it really just needed, the first stone just needed to get rolling. Just needed to send the message out. And then they had a few people signing up for their coaching program, for their group coaching program. And as soon as those people signed up, they were carried by the responsibility and by the excitement of being in that space. So, there's many different ways in which we can compel somebody into action, or in which we can provide the space that they choose. For me, I always prefer it when people are intrinsically motivated to do these things. But there are some extrinsic elements that we can use in our coaching that can be really powerful. You just need to be careful that the client doesn't become dependent.
Thank you so much, Yannick. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for your excellent questions. It's really great to be able to create a bit of a space for conversations. I hope you enjoyed that and you found it valuable. Like I said, I'd love to stay in touch. I love to support coaches. I love spending time with coaches. Most of you are so driven by wanting to help, curiosity, interest in the world. Many of us are working with our strengths around love of learning. So I appreciate your presence, and thank you for tuning in.